Hi, everyone. So we are beginning our festivities, if I might begin. So welcome, everybody. Thank you for being here. I'm just making time so people can come into the room. It's kind of okay. Again, thank you for being here. It is a great honor for me to chair this session, this award session. And you might be asking yourself why one of the co-editors of the Journal of History of Economic Thought would be chairing this session. And I will try to make a point that actually it makes sense that I am here. And not only because yes, especially because I'm the co-editor of the Journal of the Society's Journal, but also because I'm so glad that the people who are receiving the awards are the ones who are receiving the awards, and they all have a long story with the society and a connection with the journal. So in honor of the 50th anniversary of the first History of Economic Society conference, we thought that it would be a good idea just to have a little notion of the prices and a bit of the story of the prices, even if they're rather, like, say, recent in the story of the society. So the first thing is that this is a time, and this session especially, it is a time to celebrate great scholarship, and a great scholarship that has been also part of this community and that has been especially fostered and nurtured by the society and the community that society is. And I wanted to bring to memory this article from the Boston Globe in the conference, 1980 conference. No, it worked all the time. Now it's not working. Okay. And you see, there is, we were talking about this a little while earlier. There is this article in the Globe in Boston, Harvard, 1980, where they are saying, well, there's all this information about things going on at Harvard this week. There's a lot of things going on, but there's no news. We were not able to find any news about and it's called the Society of the History of Economics Conference, the SHE conference. Remember, Marianne told us that story. And actually, it kind of is mind-boggling because it's a big thing. It's a 3-day-long conference, and nobody has any idea of where it came from. So they go and ask at the economics department, and they say, no, we don't know. They go and ask MIT, and at MIT they say, no idea. Go and ask political science. No idea. Who are these people? And finally, they get to the librarian, to the Cress Library, and there they find a person who says, how on earth did you find us? And actually, that is a bit of also the story of a kind of small field, but not that small, marginalized field, but not that marginalized either, that finally people are saying, well, maybe nobody knows, but we're a lot of fun. So, and I think this idea of having a conference between people who are having fun at the conference is something that we can also recover. So you see some of the quotes here, but these people are a wonderful collection. You find some grand oddballs here. And indeed, there was more laughter, better stories, more graceful exchanges, and drier wit than is usual in any but the smallest, hottest fields. And that was the impression people had coming to the conferences. And I think it's something that we would like to recover and or just maintain, preserve in these conferences. Now, about what I'll do is just go quickly about the story of the prizes, and then I'll give the floor to the people who deserve the honor of being here, of course, those who will receive the awards this year. The Joseph Dorman Best Dissertation Prize was established in 1990. The first winner, Stockwell, and I'm having trouble seeing things, okay, was for contributions of Harry Brugman and William Ellis to classical political economy. And this is the first reason I'm up here. The supervisor was William Thwett, editor of the HES Bulletin from 1984-1989. Then this year's award, and we thank the committee, of course, for collecting all the information and going through all the propositions and selecting somebody who's also very close to the journal, Matheus Assaf, who was the editorial assistant for the journal for a long time. And this is a picture with my co-editor, who is Matheus' supervisor. And so this year's Dorfman Prize goes to Matheus Assaf, tracing mathematical economic essays in the history of departments of economics. Our second award is the Crawford Goodwin Best Article in the History of Economics Prize. It was established in 1995. The first winner, Maria Cristina Marguzzo, who is here, had the prize for the article At the Origin of Imperfect Competition, Different Views. It was published in Perspectives on the History of Economic Thought, which was edited by Karen Vaughn. HES Bulletin editor 1978-1983, also predecessor of the Journal of the History of Economic Thought. Also editor, and who was, it was, well, so you see, that's why I'm here. Okay. And so this year's best article in the History of Economics Prize was published in the Journal of the History of Economic Thought. And the author, Carlos Eduardo Suprinyak, who's here, wrote this article on Nicolas Georgescu-Roegen, development economist. And we have Carlos Eduardo here to receive the award. Finally, the Joseph J. Spengler Best Book Prize, established in 2004, first winner, Wade Hans, who's also here, on Reflection Without Rules, Economic Methodology and Contemporary Science Theory. And here I was like, what is the connection? I have to find one. Cambridge University Press, which publishes the Journal of the History of Economic Thought. And this year's award for best book goes to somebody really from the house, who is Bruce Caldwell and Hans-Jörg Klausinger. Hayek, Alive, 1988-1950, University of Chicago Press. So we all know Bruce was president of the society, distinguished fellow of the society. And I just wanted to end with a little something from the archives. And this is 1985 distinguished fellow of the society, Friedrich Hayek. Coincidence? The history of economic, and this is when he receives and accepts the award. the Distinguished Fellow designation, the history of economics was, of course, for many years, one of my main interests. I may still someday produce some little essay on the influence of Matthew Hale on the concept of social evolution. And he ends with this: I shall certainly welcome to receive the publication of the Society. Thank you. And should be grateful if you could so far as easily possible complete the set of the bulletin. So with this little introduction, I give the floor to Matheus, who is on Zoom. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Can you listen to me?
No, I can hear you, but nobody else can.
Okay. No, not yet. Okay. Okay, I guess it's working. Hi, everyone. First, I wish to say that I'm truly honored for the prize. I feel very sorry that I'm not in Vancouver with you. Unfortunately, that was a little hard for me to make the trip this year. So maybe next year we can meet everybody in person. I would like to thank the whole community indeed for because I believe my work of course benefits so much from the generosity that I found in the community of history of economics. I really enjoyed Jimena's introduction about having fun doing history of economics. I like this. I like to see my work like this, like having fun. Because if not for having fun, why I'm doing this? And I believe that my work has benefited a lot from this generosity. Uh, are you listening to me, Jimena? Yeah. Okay. I'll just continue. Uh, uh, Beginning from, of course, my advisor Pedro, but like from my colleagues in the PhD, the Brazilian scholars I've met in the conference, in the national conference, then the international scholars I've met when I went to international conference, and in every step of every circle of the community, I only found a lot of generosity. So I would like to thank for that. In this few minutes I have, I'd like to just introduce some of the topics I have written about in my dissertation, which is so when I started studying this, I was really interested to look in the transformation of economics from a verbal to mathematical science, a topic that has been explored by many historians. And I wish to like give a different perspective on the matter. So I try to look on the history of departments, like thinking about how the communities could, like the academic communities could change so fast. Like in the span of few decades, they were like no mathematical economists in the majority, and then just go for being like the majority, like just few decades later. So I wish to like just look some departments, which of course something that a lot of historians have done before. But I guess some more famous departments have some disproportionate research on them. Like for instance, the MIT, Harvard, Chicago. So I try to look to other departments who are also important, but maybe would be interesting to take a deeper look on how mathematical economics would develop in those places. I wish to take a look on departments that had like something going on in the interwar period, like some influence from American institutionalism or something like that, and that then in the post-war became at least relevant in the field of mathematical economics. So I chose two in the United States, two departments that kind of fit in all those criteria, which was like Stanford and Berkeley, which are like, of course, important departments. There is some research on them, but I try to take a look on this transformation in the community within the department. Try to understand how that shaped the emergence of mathematical economics in those places. So on Stanford, I guess the major theme on my investigation on Stanford is that cross-disciplinary spaces were very important for the growth of mathematical economics at the Department of Stanford. And that is because the economics department of Stanford was very small. This is one of the first reasons. So, in some of this, because there were some conflicts in the beginning of economics because of the American institutionalists and their like critical stance, I would say, was not very appealing to the Stanford. Yes, I could say like this. And so, although there was some institutionalism going on in Stanford in the first decade of the 20th century, after Veblen, especially after Veblen was dismissed, this kind of waned from influence in the department. But it doesn't mean that Stanford was mathematical, but there was, since the interwar period, some cross-disciplinary space that kind of welcomed this approach. And in the interwar period, this was the Food Research Institute, where some important mathematical economists of the period worked, like Harold Hotelling, Elmer and Holbrook working too. And this is like my first illustration, but there are many other spaces that are going through this that mix mathematics and economics. Another example that I gave is the creation of the Department of Statistics at Stanford that has a lot of influence from some economists. And the fact that although it was a small department at Stanford, there was always one chair dedicated to somebody interested in economics and statistics. And it was exactly this chair that was eventually Avro was appointed at Stanford in the late 40s. But he was at least until Holtaker was appointed in the mid 50s. He was kind of like the only really mathematical economist at Stanford. But Avro was not like really isolated because he managed to create some network with these other cross-disciplinary spaces that existed at Stanford. In the 50s, something that will be very important will be the rise of the behavioral sciences, and which was a lot of funding for this in the 50s. And I took a look on this specific place called the Institute for Mathematical Studies in the Social Sciences, which was headed by Arrow in the 50s and 60s. And I kind of showed that although the Department of Economics at Stanford was very small and everything, there was only like Arrow and another mathematical economists at the beginning. Because of these dynamical cross-disciplinary places, they were able to generate a lot of PhD economists doing mathematical economics. There are many examples: David Cass, Carl Schell. I discussed other examples, and these people will be influenced as they move to many other departments. I kind of follow them, this impact in the general community of academic economics in the United States in the 60s. Then the story in Berkeley is a little bit different because institutional economics was kind of more strong at Berkeley, so was not so easy to develop mathematical economics there. So I kind of follow this tradition of Berkeley, which was the largest department at Stanford. So there's some plurality beginning in the 30s in the department, but I guess the best illustration of this difficulty of mathematical economics to get a grip in the department is the story of Robert Dorfman at Berkeley. So Dorfman was a PhD student at Berkeley. He studied with Aaron Gordon and, of course, Griffith Evans, who was at Berkeley, but he was in the mathematics department. I was also mentioned here in the chapter. And Dorfman, he completed his PhD at Berkeley. He began working at Berkeley as an assistant professor. However, he was not like really welcome there. At least he kind of expressed this in later interviews, but he kind of remembers that which was kind of hostile place for mathematical economists, like at least from the veteran professors who didn't like very much what he did. And I kind of argue that it was very important to mathematical economics to get a hold in the department for some kind of, I'd say, like academic politics, like making amendments with like the older generation and the new generation of economists at Berkeley. And an important actor in this story is Andres Papandreou, who arrived at Berkeley from the University of Minnesota just after Dorfman left Berkeley to teach at Harvard. And he arrived at Berkeley to become the head of the department. And he managed to do this like this political amendment between the older generation and the new generation. His vice chairman in the department was a member of the older generation. At the same time, he was able to recruit a number of young PhDs doing mathematical economics. For instance, Roy Reisner, Dale Jorgensen, Daniel McFadden. They were all appointed at Berkeley through Papandreou's influence. Indeed, they were known at the department as the Andy's boys, like the boys from the Andy, Andrew Papandreou. And these guys were very important for the creation of a budding community of mathematical economics at Berkeley in the 1960s. So this is the so I guess this is a quick review of my dissertation. Of course, there is also a second part of the dissertation where I wanted to study a little bit more of the history of Brazilian economic thought. But in the same ideas, like I want to understand like history of mathematical economics, how mathematical economics developed, at least disseminated to Brazil. I also try to look at a specific place, specific department. But it was different because I was not looking at the economics department, but indeed to a mathematics institute, the Institute of Pure and Applied Mathematics, which we call IMPA in Brazil, an institute that was dedicated to mathematics, indeed to pure mathematics, very influenced by in the early years, at least from the Bourbaki group, then Stephen's Mayo. They have this dynamical systems is an important topic there in the institute, and they have this connection with Stephen Mayo since the 60s. And also not only because of this international connections, but also because of some local connections with some economists with interest in mathematics and engineering too. I argue that IMPA was very important to the economics, to the growing of mathematical economics in Brazil, in the sense that since they were more like pure mathematicians and they needed some applied mathematics kind of to legitimize funding, and what worked better at IMPA was indeed as applied mathematics. It was economics. It was not physics, chemistry, or I don't know, other hard science that you usually imagine when thinking about applied mathematics. And I explored these local connections, local networks that made IMPA an important player in the economic community, the academic community of economics in Brazil. So I guess that's what I wish to share with you. Again, I feel very honored, truly honored to receive the prize. Again, thank you very much. If anyone is interested in the dissertation, I'll be very happy to share via email because it has not been published yet, though I hope this happens soon. There's a bit of a delay in this publication, but that's it. I'll just pass the floor to the next winner. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Matheus. And then we'll go directly to Carlos Eduardo, please.
Okay, so I'm not a Georgescu Rogan scholar, strictly speaking. So in a sense, I guess I could say that this paper arrived by accident in my life. So instead of recounting the details of the argument, which you can all read if you're interested in the paper, what I will try to tell you is a bit of the story of how the paper came to be, right? So my interest in Georgescu Rogan came from my research into the history of Brazilian economics in the post-war era. Right? So one of the important events in that history was a cooperation agreement that was signed between Vanderbilt University and the University of São Paulo in the 1960s. Right? So this agreement established a very steady flow of US-based and Brazilian scholars back and forth between the two countries, and gave a very important boost to the consolidation of the graduate programs in economics in Brazil that were being constructed at that time. So during the course of a sabbatical leave, I had a chance to go to Vanderbilt University and do some work at the Vanderbilt archives, trying to dig the details of this story. So this is a letter that you can see there, one of the fruits of this research. So Georgescu Rogan was a professor of economics at Vanderbilt at that time, right? So he's a member of the department, and because he was a member of the department, he of course was brought into the program, brought into this cooperation agreement, and was sent to Brazil to begin the actual field work, right? So this is a letter that Georgescu Rogan sent to Eugênio Goudin, one of the most important Brazilian economists of all time, in preparation for his first visit to Brazil in 1964, right? So one of the things that Georgescu Rogan did when he came to Brazil first was to help design the curriculum for what would become the master's program in economics at the University of São Paulo, one of the first master's programs in economics in Brazil. Right? So I knew that Georgescu Rogan, of course, was important, had been important for the history of Brazilian economics. What I didn't know, and I found out working with the archives, was that Brazilian economics had also been quite important for Georgescu Rogan, right? And so I have here one little piece of evidence that points in this direction. So this is a letter that Georgescu Rogan sent to Stacy Whitcomb, who was the Ford Foundation representative in Brazil at the time, so responsible for generating part of the, for managing part of this agreement, where he says, among other things, I am deeply touched by your thinking of me as the padrinho. Padrinho is the Portuguese word for godfather, right, of the São Paulo project. You are the only person involved in this project to have realized my disinterested attachment to this good cause. For this reason, you personally can count on me whenever you think that I may be helpful, right? So these and other evidence started to make me realize that Georgescu Rogan, for him, it had been much more important, this experience of going to Brazil and participating in this project than I could have originally anticipated. Right? So the next step in the story was a visit to the Georgescu Rogan files, Georgescu Rogan papers, which are hosted at the Duke University Library. So I had a chance to go there and work with this collection. It's a relatively small collection, about 30 boxes, right? So it's manageable. It's very well organized, fortunately, right? So I had the occasion to work with this and dig a little deeper into this, the backstory behind Georgescu Rogan's involvement in Brazil. And one of the things that I found out, and this starts to bring us into the paper as it exists, was that this involvement with Brazil was just a late chapter into what was a much longer involvement with the then burgeoning field of development economics. Right. So this involvement passed through, for instance, Georgescu Rogan's work during the late interwar period in Romania, in his own hometown of Romania, and of course during also the World War II years, where he served as a consultant, an economic consultant to the Romanian government. Of course, was involved in a lot of the questions that plagued, of course, an underdeveloped country like Romania at that time. Right. But what was perhaps less well known is that right after he came back to the US, exiled from Romania in the late 1940s, and found a position in Harvard through the agency of his friend Vasily Leontiev, he immediately got to work on things that were somehow related to Romania and to the economic problems that Romania faced at the time. So this is an excerpt from a letter sent by Vasily Leontiev proposing that he join the group of the recently created Harvard Russian Research Center, one of the early spaces for research on Sovietology in the early Cold War years, right? And Leontiev says to Georgescu Rogan, it occurred to us that with the dearth of information on conditions and development in the Balkan countries seeping through the Iron Curtain, you as an experienced and qualified witness of the events and developments which took place in Romania since the end of the war might be able to prepare a small book, or should I say a large pamphlet, on the economic developments in Romania after the war, with special emphasis on Soviet Russia's occupational policies. Right. And so here we have an excerpt from a report of the activities of the Russian Research Center in the late 1940s, which describes precisely the job, the task that had been assigned to Georgescu Rogan. Right. So you can read there, part 1, main problems of contemporary Romania: population, agrarian situation, industrial development, financial policy, foreign trade, national income and standard of living, international position. And then part 2, economic changes after the war, economic burdens of the armistice, economic agreements with the USSR, monetary reform, financial reforms, nationalization, agricultural and industrial production, national income and individual incomes. All of this, of course, in the context of a third world underdeveloped economy like Romania. So this didn't last very long, because Georgescu Rogan was offered a position at Vanderbilt in the late 1940s and accepted a tenured professor of economics position there. And so he left Harvard to go to Vanderbilt. But then in Vanderbilt, he found an environment which was also conducive to those same sorts of research projects, although cast in a different light. Vanderbilt, shortly thereafter, in 1954, initiated a graduate program in economic development, one of the first of its kind in the United States. So you see there a copy of the brochure, an early 1970s brochure for the program, which, by the way, still exists. It is the official MA in economics program at Vanderbilt, right? This is a photo of the first cohort of students who went through the program. And so Georgescu Rogan, as a member of the department, was, of course, drafted into that project as well. well, and he became very much involved with the graduate program in economic development in the following years. He became involved in many different capacities. For instance, he traveled towards the 1950s on a Fulbright scholarship that was provided by to visit Italy. Sorry. So here you see a letter that was sent by one of the officers of the Fulbright Foundation, or the U.S. State Office, where he's thanking the chancellor of Vanderbilt University, Harvey Branscombe, for the services that had been given by Georgescu Roegen at that time. And so he says, Dr. Georgescu Roegen was affiliated while on his award with the Instituto Universitario de Studi Europei in Turin, where he lectured on the theoretical foundation of economic development, right? So he's doing that towards the late 1950s. And he also was enlisted to do different kinds of work. So for instance, again, late 1950s and early 1960s, he went on a tour of several of the third world countries in Southeast Asia and then in the Middle East. So he visited most of the countries: Singapore, Hong Kong, Taiwan, Thailand. So he did the whole tour of Southeast Asia. Then he goes to Japan, and then on his way back, he goes through the Middle East and visits India, visits Iran, Pakistan. So he does a whole tour of that area. And as he does that, he's writing these reports back to his department chair at Vanderbilt, where he recounts his experiences, his firsthand experience in these different areas, right? And so these are very interesting amateurish ethnographic records of what he saw at that time, right? So here we have just one example from his report from Hong Kong, where he says, I had thought that I knew pretty well the limit of economic misery from the conditions of Eastern Europe, South Italy, with which I was familiar, of course, referring back to his early experiences in Romania. But nothing, in my opinion, not even the slums of Jakarta, of which I had a glimpse, can compare with the conditions in which most Chinese live in Hong Kong. So again, this is just one example of the kinds of reflections that these travels are producing on him. And so this, when he comes back in the early 1960s to the US, comes back to Nashville, to Vanderbilt. So this is, again, a letter that he writes to one of the people that he met during his tour of Southeast Asia. And he says, well, he's reflecting about what he brought back from these trips and says, well, this combined with the result of my stay in Japan and my visit to Southeast Asia in the spring of '62, opened for me new horizons of theoretical inquiries, which I hope to accomplish within the near future. Right. And so this is the key, I guess, to the argument of the paper, right? So he comes back from this firsthand experience of the third world, of underdeveloped economic reality. And this has sparked something in him, right? He comes back with these ideas for new theoretical inquiries. Now, these new theoretical inquiries, they have to do with what I try to argue in the paper is an alternative approach to economic development. Right. So the key, perhaps one of the key insights to Georgescu Roegen's attitude towards this is to focus on what he understands to be the uniqueness of the economic situation faced by overpopulated agrarian economies. These are his terms, right? Overpopulated agrarian economies. He says there's a problem in the way in which economies have dealt with these countries because they try to apply a kind of economic theory that was developed to understand the problems of developed market economies, industrialized modern economies, right? They're trying to use these models to understand a reality that doesn't really fit the model, right? So we need a different model. So here's a quotation from a paper from the mid-1950s, which expresses more or less this argument, where it says, one certainly would not expect a society that cannot live according to the Walrasian distribution theory to commit suicide rather than adopt a new system, right? So he's criticizing the applicability of neoclassical marginal productivity theory to these semi-feudal societies where, well, market society and market relations had not really been developed at any reasonable length. Now, this in itself would not, and I'm almost finished, Jimena, this in itself would not distinguish necessarily Georgescu Roegen from the field of development economics at the time. A lot of other development economists were arguing along similar lines. what distinguishes him from his peers in the field was that he draws inspiration to propose a solution to this diagnostic, right, to this problem from different sources, right? And these sources, again, bring us back all the way to his early experiences in Romania, his involvement, his political involvement in Romania with the peasantist party of Romania, right, which was inspired by the ideas, for instance, of Alexander Shayanov, right, the so-called agrarian tradition, or sometimes known as neo-populism. Georgescu Roegen himself hated the word. He used agrarianism, right? But so Georgescu Roegen had been involved in Romania through one of his closest friends and collaborators, Virgil Maggiaro, who was a close follower of Shayanov and had absorbed a lot of these agrarian ideas from Shayanov. And he believed to have found in these ideas a way of navigating the duality between Marxism on one hand, Marxist economics on one hand, and what Georgescu Roegen himself termed as standard economics on the other hand. They said, well, these two approaches to development, right, they're very different, of course, from each other, but they converge on the emphasis that both of them put on industrialization, and especially accelerated industrialization as the surest path out of underdevelopment. Right. And so in this sense, they are aligned, they converge on the same page. And this is the problem, right? This is the wrong solution. This is a solution that doesn't really fit the reality of these peasant societies, where forced industrialization along the lines of the Western model would simply be misleading, would produce probably catastrophic results. Right. So Georgescu Roegen builds on this to argue that industrialization was definitely not a panacea for development, right? It shouldn't be seen as such, right? Of course, that was a very difficult sell back in the 50s and 60s, right? But I would argue that it's one of the things that keeps him appealing today to current generations. So, thank you.
Mine's going to be a little simpler because I don't have any slides or anything. I want to thank, what's bizarre is this, I'm getting feedback from this computer that's sitting here. So is there a way to get rid of that? Did you also have it? Oh, shit. All right. Okay. Yeah, still there. Yeah. Thank you. It's so much. No, it's still there. I was prepared to say it's so much better, but we don't even need this right now. That works. Okay. Well, I'd like to thank the committee for giving Hans-Jörg and me this award. It is extremely important to us. We worked a long time on this book. And I was trying to figure out what I would say about in the 15 minutes allotted to me here. And I thought since I gave the Distinguished Fellow address just last year because of COVID, it was delayed, in which I actually described the book in some detail, that wouldn't be the right way to go. So what I thought I would do this afternoon is just talk a little bit about Hans-Jörg and how we came to do the work together and honor him as the absent author of this book. And then talk briefly about some things that I learned in doing the book that were really important to me and that I hope will carry me forward in trying to do volume 2, which we're working on right now. And finally, I thought I would talk a little bit about how things are going with volume 2 and some of the neat stuff that's going on with it. So that's the direction I'm going in. So I didn't know Hans-Jörg Klausinger from Adam until I can't really remember whether it was that somebody sent me an email or something, but he said, "Did you see this review of one of the books in the Hayek collected works that are on money that Kresge did. Stephen Kresge, the second general editor, did. And I said, no, and he said, have a look at it. So I read the review, and the review pointed out that the collection is very polite review. The collection of articles in these 2 volumes that Kresge had done, were some of them were articles that had first appeared in German in the 1920s, and then were translated into English in the 1980s, and then a new translation was done of some of these articles for the collected work series. And then he pointed out that there had been a mistake in the printing of the original German article, that a couple of pages had been transposed, and that transposition had worked its way into the original English translation, and that it remained in the second translation that had been done for the collected works. And in typical Hans-Jörg style, very understated, he just said, you know, it's too bad. It's too bad that this mistake was duplicated, given that they went to the trouble of retranslating it. And I thought, this is one meticulous guy. I mean, who goes back and reads the original and then identifies a mistake that had not been caught by anybody? I mean, Hayek was around when the 1985 article had been translated, and he apparently, so I think no one ever read that article. I mean, basically, because the flow of the argument certainly wasn't very clear. But anyway, it was on the basis of that I thought, this is just a really fine, meticulous scholar. I had, by the early 2000s, become the general editor of the collected works, and was looking for people who might edit some of the volumes, and I invited him to do 2 of them, and he did a superb job. And he did some of his work on those volumes at the Hope Center. It was in 2010, I think, that he arrived for a semester, and we got along marvelously. And it was then that we started to talk about the possibility of doing the biography. And Hans, we did have a division of labor in doing the work, and it was a natural division of labor. I mean, Hayek spent the first half of his life. So this book's about the first half of his life. It ends when he goes to the University of Chicago in 1950. But he grew up and lived in Vienna until the 30s. Then he went to the London School of Economics, that evacuated to Cambridge, and later, during that period in Vienna, he spent 15 months in New York. Well, Hans-Jörg is from Vienna, has lived there all of his life. I've had 3 fellowships in my career. One was at NYU, which is where Hayek started a dissertation. The second one was at the London School of Economics, where he taught, and the third one was in Cambridge. So both of us knew the areas very intimately. So we felt that we would be able to give some sense of place. And I think one of the things that was most pleasurable once all the work was done was that we really tried very hard to integrate whatever interview material we had. Some of that was our own, but other bits were done by Bill Bartley, with the archival material that was in professional archives, but then also the family letters, and then our knowledge of the place. And then we just did a lot of research on the specific time periods that he was at various points in time in these places. So it didn't, everyone has their favorite bits of a book when you finish a book. One of my favorites was the chapter on New York, because not only did he have a very strong reaction to his visit to New York, which was in 1923, when he visited the largest city in the world. Actually, I just recently looked that up. But in addition to his reaction, he was just something that was total. I didn't know. He was a wonderful raconteur. He actually told great stories. You look at his professional correspondence, you don't see that. But in his letters home and to his friends during the New York period to Mises, and also you get a similar but less illuminating a sort of experience in looking at his correspondence to his family during World War I. when he was on the Italian front. It's just it's sides of a person that you would never it was certainly surprising to me, because I think of him as a kind of a more an austere figure, and I think actually I was wrong about that he actually is really one of these Vienna coffee house people that is able to tell quite a good story. So that was one of the things I learned. I thought I'd just talk about two things that I learned about his professional work that were interesting and surprising, and hopefully it would be to you too. His most famous article is The Use of Knowledge in Society. This is the one that all economists refer to. So how did he come to write this? Well, this is a great story, because it's Fritz Machlup, one of his buddies from the university days in Vienna, was during World War II in the United States. And for a short time, he became essentially the managing editor of the American Economic Review. And soon after that happened, he may have written a lot of people, but he wrote Hayek, and he said, look, yeah, I'm in this great position. Why don't you send me a paper? I can get it published in the AER. And Hayek said, he was busy. The Road to Serfdom had just come out in England. It was going to be coming out in September in the United States. He was getting ready for a trip to Gibraltar for the British Foreign Office, where he would spend 6 weeks analyzing the economic situation there. And he just, he said, if I can get to it, I will. And he thinks about it, and he writes back from Gibraltar, I'll send you something. And it's evident from the archives that basically he looked at some of his earlier work on the socialist calculation debate, but also an article that he had written and published during the war a couple of years before for a student review, the Liberal Review of Oxford University. Just like a mimeographed sort of outlet. And that's in the archives, and you can see he had written on the cover of one of the copies, use for use of knowledge in society. And the tin example is in there, the mentioning of the particularities of time and place. All of the themes that are in this very famous article were just stuff that was in earlier work. He probably wrote that article in a couple of weeks, if that much time. And he has a wonderful letter to Machlup afterwards, or maybe it wasn't to Machlup, but to someone afterwards, saying, you work on something for 10 years, nobody notices, and then you get it published in the American Economic Review, and suddenly you're getting all this applause. So he was quite attuned to the irony of that, particularly, I think, given that he had just spent 7 years prior to the war working on the pure theory of capital, which basically very few people appreciated, because it came out in 41, just when the war was starting. The second article that is, I think, a kind of a famous article of Hayek's is the Intellectuals in Socialism. And this was published in 1949. And again, doing the archival work, we found that through his correspondence with Loren Red Miller, one of these unknown foundation guys that was extremely important in terms of Hayek's career. He's the one who put him in touch with most of the people that were important to him in the United States in terms of the foundations. Helped get the financing for the American visitors to the first Mont Pelerin Society meeting, as well as had influence with Luhnow and the Volcker Fund to get money for Hayek to go to the University of Chicago when he did in 1950. Well, there was this big debate at the Mont Pelerin Society in the first meeting that continued on into the next couple of years about whether the Mont Pelerin Society was going to be an intellectual society where people just debated ideas. And in his mind, what he wanted to do was to see if they could come to some sort of agreement about what liberalism in the 20th century might look like, an attractive liberalism, versus those who wanted to be policy advisors, wanted to get ideas out in the public domain. And it wasn't just foundation people who were arguing that way. There's a number of intellectuals in the in the society, that is to say, academics in the society who wanted to go that route. And Hayek was adamant against it. And it was in one of his trips to America where he interacted with this Red Miller guy. And he had brought some work along with him to do when he was in America. The work that he was going to do was to write a postscript to the Road to Serfdom, where he would answer critics of the Road to Serfdom. And he threw that aside and ended up writing this Intellectuals and Socialism, which is for those who are not Hayek fans, this is really a statement that what we need to do is to be able to influence ideas in the long run, and that we shouldn't be engaging in party politics, and the people who we want to influence are the secondhand dealers in ideas. That's what he called the intellectuals. So these are people who are influencers, was what we'd call them today, who don't have any specialized knowledge, but people listen to them. He said we have to put together ideas that will be attractive, and that's our goal and our mission. And it became a very important document in the if we want to put it this way, the selling of liberalism in the 50s and the 60s. This was the direction that Hayek was taking. So it was these things are really important to someone like me who really enjoys learning about how Hayek came to do the various things that he did. Hopefully it's interesting to some of you. The volume 2 is what we're in the middle of now. It should take us less time. One of the things that took so long about volume 1 was just trying to figure out what material we had, and we think we have that pretty well nailed down now. But I'm deep into the Hayek's period in Chicago. We've had some serendipity sorts of moments. The book first volume was published in November of last year. Over the Christmas holiday, a letter arrived in my mailbox at Duke that I finally opened in January. It was from some guy I'd never heard of, a real letter. And he said, who's Jim Weiss? Well, Jim Weiss just had 3 or 4 pages of memories that he had from being oops, is that me? Time. A student of Hayek's in the 1950s. And he ends up sending me a 100-page manuscript of memories of the Committee on Social Thought in the 1950s. Just a wonderful experience to have somebody out of nowhere contact you. The book is really big and heavy. And I asked University of Chicago Press whether they would be willing to send some copies, and he said, look, nobody's going to want to lug that thing home. So what they did was they gave me a brochure. If you're interested in Hayek, this is probably the best deal you'll get, because it's 30% off. It's $35 instead of $50, and free shipping if you happen to live in the United States. So I've got some here if anyone's interested. Let me try to sell you my book. But anyway, again, thank you to the Society from both of us for this great honor. Appreciate it. And I only wish that Hans-Jörg could be here along with me. So thank you.
Well, thank you all. Thank you to the speakers, the winners of the awards, who have been very on time. And now I just invite you to go and prepare to celebrate and toast our winners in the awards banquet at 7 p.m. Thank you very much.
So before you leave, so Amy just asked me to announce that for all those of you who have reserved books or are interested in taking some of the books, you're free to do so right away. Right, so it's up for grabs. Take whatever you want. The books must go. So just go there and take whatever you want.